All right, so guys, welcome back to Metatrends. Mark and Mike. Mike's not going to be able to join us. He's on the politicking program right now. He's talking to voters in Miami. He's running for Commissioner of Pembroke Pines. So, but we do have Ozzie Gontag with us, and I introduced Michael Alasso. I'm sure you know Ozzie as
Yeah,
the
very well. Yes.
and the rest of us are just players in the court. He actually told me on the interview that he would have won Speaker of the Year 8 times if Vistage had allowed him to. They had to invent other awards. They're like, "What's this award about?" He's like, "Well, it's Speaker of the Year." It's just other speakers were complaining that he was winning too often. So so he's the king. The rest of us are players in the court. But I got to set you up the same way. Like, so 16 years ago when I first started chairing, the
Uh-huh.
your quotes were being quoted to me by the most respected chairs in all of New York City. Like, we're talking Norma Rosenberg, we're talking
Oh,
Bob,
yes. Oh my God. Yes.
we're talking Dick Shorten. So the list went on and on and on. And each time they said what your wisdom was, I was like, holy crap! It was a game changer for me as a chair. So even though we don't know each other all that well, and we've only
Yes.
really met this 1, 2 times or what have you, it's you've affected my career, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's that was my purpose now in life is really to support the chair community because that's where it happens.
Yeah. So, it's funny. It's like whenever I'm talking to the chairs and I use the word Vistage, I'm really mean the chairs because I'm not so sure that Vistage International is completely aware of the value proposition that we provide. And part of the reason why is the majority of them have never been chairs. They've never been members. They've never been speakers, and of which I've been all three. So the
Yeah.
only thing I haven't been is corporate. And when I was talking for Rob Knauer in Chicago 2 weeks ago,
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
he's one of the few that's been corporate, a member, and a chair.
Yeah.
So it's kind of rare to be all of those types of things. So, but
That was, yeah.
go ahead.
What I did was with Jim Weiner was a member of my group when he was with Dave Belden in Washington D.C. He had a year when he was let go. And so he joined my group, and then the next year he became a chair. So from 2001 to 2020, he sat in my group as a member and a chair, and I sat in his group as a member. So it was just a wonderful experience that we shared back and forth. And then in 2018, we merged the groups. It just
That's
made
awesome.
more sense at that time.
Yeah, but your background wasn't just chairing, if I understand it correctly. I had heard a rumor that you were a monk and maybe a psychologist. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes. I was with the Augustinians that run Villanova.
Oh, wow.
So I went in there for 3 months and I ended up leaving 9 years later. I was the deacon and I took a year leave and then decided not to go back. And that was the year of, all this stuff was happening in the Catholic Church, the Ecumenical Council, Pope John the 23rd. There just was a lot going on. And I got in trouble with the Cardinal in Washington, D.C., because I was part of a free floating group that was really bringing all of the changes and transitions into reality.
What's funny about that is there was two other chairs that I know that were actual monks before they became chairs, and they said one. I remember first names. They were both named Phil, and they were in like the Tech Midwest area. Like I can't recall whether it was Michigan or Wisconsin, but they both told me that chairing was the most spiritually rewarding work they've ever done.
No, it's probably the most rewarding for me, not having been incorporated at all as a therapist and psychologist. Basically, um, it was the most challenging thing for me to do, but as you said, the most rewarding.
Yeah,
34 years is it's a long time.
In my case, so picture I'm in like 52 cities a year. I do about 100 presentations. I've done just shy of 1,000 now for Vistage overall. But I'm running into something on a fairly regular basis that I wanted to cover with you because you've got a very kind of even keel. Like, you remind me of my brother, who I make fun of him calling him a weather vane because the
Uh,
deal is like the wind's blowing this way, he just kind of goes like this. The wind's blowing that way, he's just kind of like this. He's just easy going kind of guy, and you remind me of him. So I want to get your opinion on this. I'm running into an ever increasing amount of political ideology in my audiences
yeah.
to the point where I've actually had to institute a buy-in in the beginning I call it the new superpower of the 21st century. It's to be unoffendable. If you're unoffendable, you're open to truth. If you're easily offended, because there's a whole concept in evolutionary theory called conspicuous outrage. It's a form of peacocking your what's referred to as phenotypic quality. Like who's driving the nicest car, who has the nicest suits, who has all these status symbols. So believe it or not, being easily offended has become a status symbol. It's where it's like, I'm such a good person that I'm offended by everything that comes out of everyone's mouth.
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
So it's to me, it's like it's so counter to what we do with members in peer advisory work because they have to be open to dissenting opinions. And there's certain places that are just absolutely allergic to dissenting opinions. Like San Francisco is just terrible. And Boston is the worst place I've ever spoken.
Wow.
In fact, what I used to do with the chairs in Boston, I would tell them when they booked me, I'd say, okay, convince me to come.
Yeah.
And I'd say, convince me I'm not walking into a firing squad. And then I'd sit in silence while they kind of humming it. So the argument here is that people are making up their minds before they even see the evidence. And then what can sway them? Like I just spoke for Jeff Hutzel's groups in Kansas City,
Uh-huh.
and I had them do this buy-in thing about I commit to being unoffendable for the duration of this presentation. And then I jokingly say, now I'm going to do my best to offend every last one of you. And they all kind of crack up over that. And so one guy sitting at one of the tables, he told me in a one-to-one afterwards, he said to me, he said, I couldn't imagine how your presentation could offend anyone. And yet the two women sitting on each side of me, both of them hated your presentation and hated you. And I was like,
Uh,
it's amazing to me, like what people politicize these days. So I'm curious about your opinion. Have you dealt with it? What kind of solutions would you have for it?
part of the issue you were saying is like, how do I deal with the truth? And I have my beliefs, and it really is what are the things that I do to deal with the reality. And so I can either open myself, be vulnerable, listen, not be defended, that whole thing of defending myself. I can defend myself from a position of holding my arms, all of those physiological parts of it. And part of it is, uh, it's about thinking. How am I thinking? Can I hold two opposite positions and look at them and and I just wrote about it. It was how can I be the defense and the prosecutor and the jury and the judge? And how can I look at both sides? Because there's truth on both sides. But the reality of it is, I hold a position. And when I hold that position, it basically stops me from seeing the other side or seeing reality. And I create my reality by how I either am open to looking at it at the thousand other ways that other people look at it. But there is that whole idea of what is truth.
I
You
think
know,
I think it even it's like it helps me to understand the scientific method better. And the reason why is because, all right, you have your biases, I have my biases.
Mhm.
I can spot your biases a mile away. I cannot spot my own,
Yeah,
but you can. So what we can do is like so during COVID, a sociologist kind of came at me pretty hard at a family gathering. So he's a PhD, and he said to me, "Do you trust science?" And I said, he said, "Do you trust scientists?" I said, "No." And he said, "But do you trust science?" And I said, "Yeah." And this wasn't like some setup gotcha thing I
yeah,
had on it. I didn't realize it until the moment. It's the scientific method that we need to trust. And not everybody utilizes the scientific method because
is.
it's so difficult to deploy on so many things. Like you drive yourself crazy trying to make a decision about what to eat in the morning if you use the scientific method. But for certain truths, it requires objective truth. And, because the people who like are listening to this show right now,
Yeah.
they tend to fall into one of two categories. One category is like the Noahs of the world, early 20s. They're the entrepreneur market that one day want to build or buy a
Mhm.
business. Then the other ones are the members themselves, the people who own or private middle market companies that are taking enormous risks on a daily basis. So it's how what I want to do is data mine the wisdom because frankly, the one thing I miss about sharing is the BCG. Like,
Yeah.
I don't miss the knot in my stomach about who's gonna show and who's not gonna show that day and, who's gonna stay a member, who isn't gonna stay a member. That I don't miss. But what I do miss is I miss the Norman Rosenbergs of the world and the Bob Duncans of the world. Because when I walked in that room, I was the youngest chair in the country at the time. I was 42 years old, and I knew my resume was nothing compared to all these other, like, killers in the business world. Like, my I look like one of those things is not like the others, right? So I
Right.
knew to kinda keep quiet, and then Norma Rosenberg opened her mouth quoting you a couple of times and then one on her own, and I was like, "I need to shut up around this woman." Like, the best line I ever heard from her was she said, that, um, CEOs throw psychological reins around their company and pull it back to the level they're comfortable at and don't even know it.
Yes.
So it's like the enemy of great is good, and, from my perspective, 80% of them will not qualify for a deal. They will not
Yes.
qualify to pass due diligence. So it's how do we increase those numbers? Because we have a massive threat and opportunity because more companies will change hands in the next 15 years than ever before in
Yeah.
American history. So it's like, how do we help them as much as possible? So based on your vast wisdom and experience, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's looking to do a startup, buy a company, or build it, like a entrepreneur market?
If the whole idea of starting a company, it becomes the statement is you don't have a vision, the vision has you. And I think that's the reality of that somehow this is what I want. And then it becomes how do I persuade other people to join me in going where somewhere what hasn't been created? And the statement from my mentor, Lee Thayer, was basically one of my main teachers, and he taught Pat Murray. I mean, the impact that he had, but it's the leader doesn't make the organization successful. The organization makes the leader successful. And can the leader basically instill in these people a sense of we have a purpose? And the statement, is a life of purpose basically is the purpose of life. And having that purpose and it and becomes what, in terms of how am I driving somewhere that is for the good of myself, my family, the community, and for all of the people that are working for me. And I realized that as a leader, then it becomes how do I support all of these people? I have one of the companies here in San Diego, RCP Block and Brick, and they basically have maybe 250 employees. But when you look at it, the revenues that are generated from there really support probably 5 to 10,000 or more people when you look at the community. And I realize it becomes the role of someone saying, I'm supporting these people who are supporting their families, who are supporting the company. And then it becomes, okay, what is fair? What does it mean? What are we doing in our society? And that, this morning I had, it was uh, on my text, we're going to 7 times if you, whatever you donate right now. It's the whole issue of it's about money right now, which is really sad to say that the people that are elected who, to become a president now it's like I think 6 to 10 billion dollars have to be put in. And so it becomes starting a company, is it about the money that I'm going to make or is it the money that I'm going to make to support myself and my family? And one day, if I had a great organization and the people that are there really love what we're doing because we have a purpose, then it makes a difference in their life and in the life of the leader. And I think that's that whole issue of, can I create something that one day could be sold or could be acquired? And basically, the whole idea of mergers and acquisitions, they're really all not mergers, they're all like acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
Means that we're acquiring. So how do I acquire a group of people that see that what we're doing makes a difference in my life and in the lives of all of the people whose lives I touch? And I think that's where the chair comes in, is that ability, it used to be increasing the effectiveness, but enhancing the lives of chief executives. Well, people stayed because it enhanced their lives. Why did I have members for 20 or 25 years? And it wasn't just because about them making money. It was the fact that I could go there and these are people that will challenge me. That what I'm saying, and again, goes back to the next generation, that ability to be challenged and not to get defensive and not to be upset when someone says, that's stupid. And I think it becomes the, the mentoring part. And I think that, the sage with positive intelligence, that there's a wisdom that's there and having that peer advisory group to challenge and help you create your future. My daughters were raised on if you want to know the future, create it. So it's what I'm doing now is creating my future. And so when I retire, I work with heart patients, and I've been for the last 20 years because Vistage time gave me time to set it up where I could work 4 to 8 hours with cardiac patients from heart lung transplants to, a stent. And so that whole idea is that you don't retire because it means you were tired the first time. Basically, what you're doing is you're preferment. And a lot of chairs, it's about preferment. I think for work that you and I do and that I did, it's preferring to do what, when, where, how, and with who I want to do it. And I couldn't have a better community of men and women in the chair community that challenge me, and that at the same time have a group of members that basically are helping me perform because the measure of performance is performance. And how well do I perform, not just as a chair, but I talk about being a world-class human being. And I think that's the role of that we play. It's so much wider. I think next to the priest or your lawyer or your accountant, the chair touches so many of those areas of a person's life that, you know, for me, I said I would be available 24/7 for my members. And in the 34 years, I had two situations where I got the call after midnight. And it was, again, the death of one of the members, and another one, a member had gotten lost. And he gotten lost because he was manic depressive. He didn't let us know. It took about 3 days to find him in a psychiatric ward here in San Diego.
Wow.
But again, it's that kind of uh, awareness of being present, for the births and grandchildren and your own children, and also dealing with the death of people that are close and dear to our hearts.
So picture, I get a call from Bob Duncan, and we had
Yeah.
kind of an unusual, relationship. Like, one time, I sent him an email. He had split the VCG in New York City into 2 separate VCGs and gave him numbers. And, so I sent him an email, and I said, "Bob, I get the feeling that being a chair is like being, it's like being a father." And, I said, "Does the fact that I have no idea which VCG I'm in, does that make me your retarded son?" And he goes, it's like he types back and he goes, "That's the best email I've ever gotten." And he called me his wayward son. He goes, but he would call every once in a while when he wanted to like, I don't know what you'd call it. When I was chairing, I used to hear it all the time. In my coaching practice, I hear it all the time. Mark, you would have been proud of me, right? I'm sure you've heard that over the years.
Yeah.
So whatever that is, but Bob had that relationship with me. He calls me up and he's like, "You would have been proud of me." So he calls me up and he's up against it because, one of his members is going through a rough time. He's like, "Have you ever dealt with this, Mark?" And I go, "Well, yeah. I talked two of my members out of suicide in a financial crisis."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh, so you know." I was like, "Dude, where were you 2 years ago? You couldn't warn me about that? Like, I got to worry about that." We share training didn't teach me about that. So sure as hell, I had to. And one of them doesn't remember it. He was that bad off back then.
Yeah.
One remembers it and is very thankful that, I was able to talk him out of it. But I was doing my best, like Apollo 13 throughout the whole thing. Like, this is the finest hour. I was giving
Oh
everything I
my
could.
gosh.
Yeah, so it's there's a rough side to the thing, especially when you experience things like financial crisis or COVID. But I've seen some absolute miraculous work over the years, some really good stuff. how, like you said something a little earlier, how I would phrase it is that through commerce, we're capable of what religion hopes to accomplish and what
Mm,
politicians fail at. So what I do is I get the groups to add up all the employees that are represented by the leaders in the room. And then, it's always in the thousands. And then
yes.
I said, yeah, well, what about their families? And then the room kind of goes silent. And I said, what about the vendors? What about the customers? So when people like beat up capitalism and commerce, it's typically showcasing a profound ignorance of both history and statistical literacy. Like
Yeah.
it's like the reason why I get out of bed and I fly around to all these places because travel is just brutal, is because I'm there to help the few protect the many. So I want that as a legacy. So and it's really powerful because the share community is just really special. But I do have to warn some of the people that are considering getting into business. This is not for the faint of heart. It's an enormous amount of risk. And the
Yes.
deal is, and frankly, most of the business owners don't know how much risk they're really taking. Like it's almost like the first bad thing they go through is the first moment they realize how much risk they're taking. Like I
Yeah.
literally had one guy who was making $1 million a year up until the financial crisis, was literally in tears telling me he's going to be living in a cardboard box because he went from making 1 million a year to pumping into the business 1 million a year. And he was just in the worst way possible, and it was really difficult to keep him upstairs mentally. So it's like almost like a little bit of a cautionary tale for entrepreneurs, but the opportunity is massive because so many
Mhm.
companies are going to change hands in the next 15 years. It's just phenomenal. So it's almost
Yeah.
like with my coaching practice, what I'm trying to do is get the people out from under. Stop working 58.7 hours a week. So what I want you to do is identify everything that you absolutely hate to do. And then those are the first delegation tools. Then once we can get them out from under the defensive side of things, then we can get them on the offensive side of things. And you reminded me of a quote from Dan Wartenberg.
Oh
So
God, I love Dan. Yes.
yeah, I don't know if he's still chairing now, but he was a madman. He was one of the first speakers I ever saw, and he literally tore apart the easel and threw it around the room. And he's like, he would get to everyone, "What'd you get out of this?" And he said, "Oh, that's crap." He goes, "Oh crap, are you doing anything about it?" He was just like this evangelical guy for
Yeah.
business. But it was a great quote. He said to me, that Vistage is the cure for the pathologically optimistic.
Yeah.
All right, so what I wanna do is I wanna take the this over to the other platforms. So we do it, the first half an hour, we put up for, YouTube and anyone that wants it. The second half an hour, we put it specialty on the Middle Market Forum. So what we wanna do now is really talk about the Vistage members and what they're up against and what I'm seeing out there.